So what I want to talk about now is the first action plan meeting. We generally host this action plan meeting with the opioid improvement team on the same day as the kickoff meeting, when everything is still fresh in folks' minds. The purpose of this meeting is for the opioid improvement team to reflect on what they've learned from the kickoff. What did they hear? To decide on measures of success, to identify milestones for the work, and to develop an action plan. So this first objective, reflecting on what you learned, particularly during the small group activity, there will be a lot to process in what folks shared, in the diversity of answers they gave to the self-assessment and to the specific examples that they brought up, or the specific requests that they made of the opioid improvement team, or perhaps of some of the strengths that were identified that you want to follow up on and learn more about Tomas's workflows, and could you see a copy of that, and maybe we should pilot test that in this other care team. So getting all of that down on paper is really important. And as I mentioned before, it's also nice to collect those self-assessment sheets so that you can then compile the responses and have that to look at to identify really what you want to be focusing on for this work. Helping the opioid improvement team decide on a measure of success. So this might evolve as your capacity to track and monitor what's happening with this patient, with patients on long-term opioid therapy changes. But generally, we introduce that there are 3 different kinds of measures that the opioid improvement team can consider tracking and then sharing across the clinic. There are outcome measures, process improvements, and small tests of change. So the outcome measures, those are the ones that in clinics that I've worked with in the past, they are not generally able to start off by measuring these outcomes. So that might be something like an aim you might set around an outcome measure would be reducing the number of patients with a morphine equivalent dose of 50 or maybe 90, depending on what your clinic goal would be, or higher by, say, 10% in 6 months. So if you don't yet know who all of your patients are who are on long-term opioid therapy, or perhaps there isn't a reliable and consistent way to record morphine equivalent dose in the EHR, this might not be something that your opioid improvement team wants to take on as one of their first measures of success. What we often see opioid improvement teams take on are process improvement measures. So an example of this is they want to identify and label all their patients who are on long-term opioid therapy with the same ICD-10 code by, maybe 3 months from now. So that would be a sort of a process improvement goal that they could share with the clinic and be working towards achieving and saying, okay, now we've got 30% of our patients labeled. Now we've got 50%, and report out on that over time. And then that final type of measure, small tests of change, this is another thing that you could be way to assess how things are going. This is often good with sort of pilot testing, for example, workflows, or in this example, you want to see, could we use iPads to give patients their annual pain visit forms rather than paper? Will that make things easier or worse? And you could do that over the course of 1 week and then talk to front desk staff and say, what was it like? What were the problems? What were the hiccups? Is this worth pursuing? So generally during the first action plan meeting, you introduce these types of measures and then ask the opioid improvement team what's feasible, and also what would be motivating, what would keep people involved, and what would they care about that they would want to hear as a measure of success, and help them identify something to start out with. Identifying milestones. So if we click on the link here, what that will show you are the list of design and implement stage milestones that we suggest a clinic could work on. And if it's not able to load, that's fine. You can see a snip of it here on the slide. So what we'll generally do is print these out and bring them to the action plan meeting and have the opioid improvement team take a look at them and say, okay, do we want to try to work towards all of these over the course of our work? Do we want to just focus in on some? Maybe we've already done some and we don't have to worry about those. And so it's a chance to say, okay, this is our list, our menu of milestones we're going to achieve over the work to achieve over the next year. We can track this over time as we have revised our policies. Check that milestone has been done. You can celebrate that across your clinic. Or we have now revised our patient agreement so that it supports the policy and really educates patients about risks. So figuring out what milestones you want to work on for the length of the project, and then also which milestones do you want to start on? What are the ones you're going to take on for the next 3 months? So during the action planning meeting, the last thing you're going to be doing is developing an action plan with the clinic. And that is figuring out what are the first goals that we want to work towards. Who will be responsible for working towards that? What are the steps that need to take place? And who is responsible for each of those steps, and when will those steps be done by, and what resources are available to support that work? One thing that I've seen is that clinics often make the mistake of saying, oh, well, we want to revise our policies, and we want to do this, and we want to do that, and let's do patient agreement, and let's make sure that everybody gets education. And they put way too much in their action plan, and it's no longer achievable. And then when they come back together again, they're kind of deflated because they weren't able to get that much done. So I really encourage practice facilitators to make sure that the opioid improvement team is reflecting on what is feasible and limiting what goes into that action plan. The other thing that sometimes clinics forget about is that they don't just have to do the work as an opioid improvement team. They can call on others from the clinics, and this is the slide before this one, Katie. They can call on folks across the clinic to get involved and help out. And that actually helps folks remember that this work is happening, shows that you're valuing their perspective. And in particular, if your opioid improvement team doesn't have wide role variation, it's a way to make sure that you're getting the people who are doing the work to be involved in deciding on how to make changes and valuing that perspective. So we generally create an action plan every 3 months and revisit them and update them at each action plan meeting. What are some of the milestone activities that clinics often will start with? So something as simple as just protecting time for that opioid improvement team to meet and work is a really simple and important, achievable first milestone activity. So having the team think through how often are we going to meet, where are we going to meet, who's going to set that up, et cetera, is really essential to moving the work forward. Another milestone activity clinics will start off with will be, how are we going to emphasize that this project is happening and that it's important, and how will we continue to solicit that feedback like we did during the kickoff event? Clinical education opportunities being offered to team, staff, and providers is another important one, because it sort of lays the foundation of where we're all starting from. What do we all know about what chronic pain is? What do we all know about the different ways to treat chronic pain? And having that similar foundation helps people be able to come to consensus around this next commonly prioritized activity, how we're going to revise our policies, and then also maybe patient agreements as well. Working on identifying who the patients are going on long-term opioid therapy is a common first milestone activity, and then also getting all the clinicians signed up for the state PDMP, and then if it is allowed in your state, also having delegates signed up. So these are some of the activities that we've seen clinics put into their first action plan.